All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to World History 1. Today we're going to be continuing our series on the ancient civilizations. Today, you're looking at the screen, obviously, we are dealing with Egypt. So, going into it, some characteristics of Egypt. So, it is located in Africa, the northeastern or upper right corner, in the Nile River Valley. So, things really start happening in the Nile River Valley around 6000 BCE. That's when the first people are believed to have moved into the area, so a good 8,000 years ago. And we're going to see, after some time, we get, agriculture and everything starting to go around 3200 BCE, so 5,200 years ago. Hieroglyphics are going to start to be developed in Egypt. Now, hieroglyphics, those are those little pictures that the Egyptians used to write with. All right, so those are some of your key early characteristics with Egypt. Now, getting into some more of the actual history, here's some more examples of hieroglyphics. Now, we're going to talk about a number of the kings and pharaohs of Egypt. Now, the earliest one that we get to talk about is King Menes, who is the first to unify Egypt through conquest. And what is unifying? That is bringing two or more things together into one entity, into one unit, to unify into a singular thing. All right. Now, he is going to reign for roughly about 50 years as king. And he is the first king who thought to unify Upper and Lower Egypt. Now, Upper and Lower Egypt are a unique thing because Upper Egypt is actually in the south and Lower Egypt is in the north. Now, the reason why this can be both interesting and confusing is because they're talking about the Upper Nile and the Lower Nile River. And the Upper Nile, which is in the south, is where the river begins and it flows northward, running downhill to the Mediterranean Sea. All right. So that's why upper, meaning it's higher elevation, down to Lower Egypt, which is the lower elevation. That's why. Now, King Menes, he's also going to be the first that's going to start having construction projects that are eventually going to evolve over years of, changing and getting better engineering to the pyramids. He's going to be the first to start building these types of structures that would resemble what we would think of as a pyramid. So that would be like step pyramids, things like that. All right, some major dates dealing with the kingdoms. So we have the first kings, the first early dynasty in Egypt from 3150 to 2613. Around 3000 BCE, we're going to see trade being established between Syria and Egypt. Syria is that area in the Middle East, think just to the left, west of Iraq, north of Israel, all right, southeast of Turkey. All right, around 2670, we're going to see the reign of King Djoser in Egypt. He's going to build like the first true pyramid. All right, and these are going to be step pyramids. And we're going to see more being built by Imhotep. Well, the architect is Imhotep under King Djoser. He's the guy who designs it because King Djoser wants it. And this is an example of one of those step pyramids that have been recovered by from the desert by archaeologists. Now, Imhotep in Egypt he's going to also be writing medical texts describing ways to treat over 100 diseases and 48 different types of injuries. One of the things that is cool about this is the Egyptians were actually capable of doing brain surgery, 5,000 years ago. It would have been very painful. The person getting the surgery done basically would have had to get drunk so they wouldn't feel the pain as much. and they would cut like the scalp, peel the skin to the side a little bit, take a hammer and chisel and crack their way into the skull. And yeah, that is essentially what brain surgery used to look like, not the very clean cut stuff that we have now. So, yeah, thank God we don't have to do that anymore, right? Now, the Old Kingdom period in Egypt. So this is, 5,500 years ago. We are going to see the Great Pyramids being constructed by the pharaoh Khufu, or Cheops. The Sphinx is going to be built in this same time period, about 4,500 years ago. Now, you see here in the image, this is the Great Pyramid with the Sphinx in front of it. Now, the Sphinx, if you don't know, that is essentially the head of a human on the body of a lion. That's kind of what a Sphinx is. There are Sphinxes in a lot of different cultures, like in ancient Greece. The Sphinx also had wings. But the Egyptian Sphinx, to my knowledge, did not have wings. It was just a human head on a lion. Now, the pyramids were constructed to honor the rulers and, also to be used as tombs in some cases. Not always a tomb, but, there's a decent chance that most of them were used as tombs. The ones that have been found anyway. Because they're always finding something new in the deserts of Egypt. All right, the Middle Kingdom. So this is from the year 2040 BCE to 1782 BCE. So a good, almost 300-year long period. We're going to see bronze, which is a metal that is derived from combining tin and copper together to make a stronger metal. We're going to see Egypt being conquered by a group called the Hyksos. Now they come swarming in from the Middle East, and they take over. And we're going to see the kingdom of Kush being formed south of Egypt towards the beginning of the Nile River. We'll get to talk about the Kush people in several classes from now. All right, some of the rulers from the Middle Kingdom. Amenhotep I. Now he's going to have the capital in Thebes, and he's going to have more central residence, like for the royal family, to the south of Memphis, and he's going to have various posts within his administration, and his supporters are going to get those jobs because they support him. So he's going to reward them for their loyalty. Because the Nile River is the essential bloodline for Egypt to survive, to keep the river safe and the communities along the river safe, he is going to build fortresses all along both sides of the river to protect the people that it gives life to. All right, so this is going to go up and down the entire river through the territory they control. He's also going to be the reason why Egypt is going to start to prosper again after, having some turmoil at the end of the Old Kingdom. And he's going to start having some more international relations with other lands, other kingdoms, starting getting a trade network going. Now, so he was the most important one really out of the Middle Kingdom. Now we take a look at the New Kingdom, which is from 1570 BC, so 3,500 years ago, to about 3,000 years ago. So good 500-year period is how long this one lasted. Now, Pharaoh is now being used as a term for the rulers of Egypt, starting with the New Kingdom. And they're going to be having a strong central government that is established in theocracy. So a strong single person is in charge of the government under theocratic rule, which means under religious rule. So the pharaohs are absolute rulers. Anything they say or want happens, and they are thought of as godly beings. They are thought to be descended of the gods, that they are gods. Now, Amosis I He was like one of the first major kings of the New Kingdom. He is going to kick the Hyksos out of Egypt and destroys basically their capital of Avaris, which is further into the Middle East. It's like out in here somewhere. And after him, we're going to see the Egyptian Empire reaching its greatest extent under Thutmose I, which is basically with this map right here. So like they go all along the river, the coastlines. It's all because there's really nothing out here or here that's just desert. There's like nothing there. And by the year 1500, they're going to extend their power all the way into Mesopotamia to the Euphrates River, which is, right here. So it's pretty impressive what they were able to do and conquer. Yep. Here is an interesting figure from Egyptian history, Queen Hatshepsut. She was a female pharaoh, and she would dress and take on the role of a pharaoh. So she would dress as a man. She wore the false beards because those beards, like those conical beards that come off of the chins, they actually were not real. They were fake hair that was basically glued to their chins every morning. So she wore one of these, and she would wear clothing that would make her appear to be a man so that she could rule, because she wanted to be the ruler. And there were people who supported her, and they helped her be able to pull it off. So we do have some good things that come from her ruling. She ruled for a good 22 years. That's very impressive just in general for a ancient ruler, especially if it's a woman during this time, because up until, let's face it, recent centuries, like the last 100, 200 years, women were basically second-class citizens or third-class citizens in some cultures. So the fact that she was able to rule a kingdom in the ancient world, 3,500 years ago, that's highly impressive, especially for that time length. She is going to expand trade with other countries, and she's going to build this temple that you see in the bottom right picture, Derabari, and that is, if you see any pictures of it like closer up, it is a very beautiful temple. And yeah, it was a very, very big engineering project that she became known for from her rule. All right, Thutmose III. This was the stepson of Hatshepsut. Now we call the Napoleon of the Egyptians because he is going to further expand the Egyptian empire to its biggest extent that had been seen to this point. So he is going to get Egyptian rule over Syria and Palestine, so taking all of this territory and getting involved, going down the rivers a bit more and expanding out into the deserts a little bit. So pretty impressive with the conquest. Now we get this guy, Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV. Now he is called the heretic king because he pretty much elevated himself to the level of a god, and was like the only god. Like he basically turned them into like a one god society, and he was that one god. Now he was the husband of Queen Nefertiti and the father of Tutankhamen by one of his other lesser wives, but Nefertiti was his top wife, his favorite wife. And he was also the father of Ankhesenamun by Nefertiti. And Anaxamun and Tutankhamen, they were step siblings who became husband and wife. The ancient world was weird with marriage for royalty, okay? That I know it's weird, it sounds gross, it is, but it's a thing that happened, and it would happen over the next several thousand years of human history when it came to royalty and nobility. It's just a fact we have to accept about history. So we're going to see during his reign, the first 5 years, he kept traditions of Egypt, including polytheism, so multiple gods, and the capital of Thebes. But the following 5 years is when he's going to move the capital to Amarna and force Egypt to become monotheistic, one god, to a god named Aton. And that god Aton is basically him. And he would change his name also to Akhenaten, because he was Amenhotep IV first, but he became Akhenaten. He would neglect a lot of the foreign deals that were going on and pursuing things that he wanted to pursue, which was basically him being a self-centered person. Now, his wife Nefertiti, her name means beautiful one has come. So, like I said with the previous slide, this is the primary wife of Akhenaten. She ruled as his equal. So this was very different, like for the ancient world as well. Women did not rule as equals to their husbands. The queens, they typically they had some duties that they had to attend to, especially when there was foreign dignitaries to have entertain and to make deals with. But the fact that she was his equal is a very big deal, and that was all the way until his death. And he was around for a while. So yeah. Now let's talk about Tutankhamen. Marries his half sister Akhenaten in 1336. He is going to reign for about 9 years with Amenhotep as his queen. We're going to see a bunch of religious reforms, returning Egypt to its more traditional structure of polytheism. He's going to move the capital from where his father had it back to Thebes. He's basically undoing a lot of the messed up stuff that his father did. And he's going to mysteriously die at the age of 18. Now, when his tomb was discovered and his sarcophagus was taken out, x-rays have been done of his body over the decades since it was found, or last 100 years since it was found. There is evidence that perhaps he was murdered, and possibly by blunt force trauma. So someone cracked his head open with like a club or something. We're not entirely sure, but that's what some evidence has pointed to, due to some studies that have been done on his body. Now, this guy right here, Ramses II, he is one of the more interesting pharaohs. Remember the Battle of Kadesh we spoke about last time? This is the guy who fought against the other group that we had talked about. He is Ramses II of Egypt. He is fighting against the Hittites at Kadesh, and that is a pretty big battle. It's like the first major battle in human history. The first recorded peace treaty is a result of that war between Ramses and the king of the Hittites, Muwatalli, after Kadesh has fought. We're going to see him living to be 96 years old. That's very old even by today's standards. He would have over 200 wives and concubines. So that's wives and girlfriends, like the numbers combined. 96 sons and 60 daughters, most of which he would outlive. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. And we're going to see some of his accomplishments. He secured the borders with such things as the Battle of Kadesh. He would bring a lot of wealth and prosperity through trade agreements for Egypt. And this lower right picture right here, this is a temple to Ramses II. It is actually not in its original location anymore. Originally, it was carved into a cliffside that is along the Nile River, but back in the 1970s, our side of the year zero, the 1970s, like 50 years ago, uh, Egypt was building the Aswan High Dam, and they were going to be flooding the area that the temple was in. So it was meticulously broken up into pieces like a giant puzzle, and it was rebuilt like in another location a couple miles away into like a man-made hill for it to be like to help protect it and keep it in its integrity together. It was an engineering marvel. It's really interesting if you look into it. All right. One of the big things that people like to talk about with Egypt is the mummies. So mummification, we're going to go over the process of this a little bit. So mummification is the process of preserving a body so that it does not rot away as fast as it normally would. So you are embalming the body with oils and herbs and everything and salts to dry it out and wrapping it in a linen cloth. So bodies who were taken to embalmers, it was typically because they had money. So it was very expensive, and they would take the body's brain out through the nostrils. And the way they would do that is they would have two tools. One was kind of a chisel that they would put up the nose and hit it with a little hammer to crack their way into through the nasal passage and the sinuses into the brain cavity of your skull. So they make a hole into there, and then they take this other tool, which is like a little hook on a stick, and they put that in there, they swirl it around, and they pull the brain out through the nose. All right. So they would also take out the contents of your stomach, clean the inside of the dead person with wines and spices, making it all smell nice and pretty. They would also take out some other organs like the liver and the heart, and they would they would dry the body out with salt. They would oil it up again and make it all smell all nice and good with the different herbs and perfumes. And they would wash the body off and wrap it up in linens. And then we get the canopic jars. These jars would hold the internal organs, and that are harvested from the body, and they would be put into these jars that are representing four gods called the four sons of Horus. Now we have Imseti, which is the human-headed one, as you see here on the right of this picture. This is where the liver went. Then there is Api the baboon, which is right here in the front, which the lungs went into. And then there is Damatuf, the jackal, which is where the stomach was put. And then there is Kebesenuf, which is the falcon in the back here. That is where the intestines went. And these organs would be removed, and they would be put into these jars, and they would be like kept with the body, like as part of like the treasure that the body would be buried with, the goods that they get to take to the afterlife with them, and except for the heart. So I was mistaken about removing the heart, because in the afterlife, when they go into the hall of judgment before the god Osiris, their heart would then be weighed against a feather and if they are pure of heart and lived a good life and they're a good person, the feather would weigh more than their heart, and they get to go to the blessed afterlife. Now, if they had things that weighed on their soul that made them guilty of something, their heart would weigh more than the feather, and then they would go to the bad side of the afterlife. That's essentially how that would work. All right, so let's go a little bit more into some things here. After 70 days, the body is washed after it being dried out with salts and everything. They're stuffed and wrapped in the fresh linens. The head embalmer dresses as Anubis, which is the jackal-headed god. the god of embalming. He's like helps bring the souls to the afterlife. You would bless the dead person, and priests would then say prayers to help the person find their way to the next life. And then that's when the body's finally wrapped in the final layer of bandages, which are soaked in a resin, kind of basically gluing it to the body. And there are amulets placed within the bandages that are symbols of power, protection, and rebirth. Then the wooden coffin that holds the body is sometimes wooden, sometimes stone, depending on how wealthy the person was. The sarcophagus is that coffin. They would be put in those, and they would be decorated very finely inside and outside in a bunch of different styles, depending on what the family wanted. And yeah, then they would be buried in their final resting place with their earthly treasures to help them in the afterlife. Now, I've mentioned some of the gods. Here are some of those ones that I had mentioned. So in Egyptian polytheism, we have, these are just several of the gods. There are many, many more than this. But some of our main ones that get talked about are these. We have Ra, which is the sun god, Horus, which is the god of the sky, Isis, which is the goddess of life, Osiris, the god of the dead, and there's Amun, who is the king of the gods. At one point in Egyptian religious history, Amun and Ra would be combined into one god, and it was called Amun-Ra. All right. Egyptian society was broken down like this in tiers for a hierarchy. The pharaoh at the top, obviously, then the government officials, because they help keep everything running smoothly. That's the viziers, which are basically, they are the people who help out the pharaoh. They're people who give advice. They're the advisors. Then there are the priests, and then there's the nobility. Right after that is the soldiers, and who help protect the country. They're very well liked in Egyptian society, the soldiers, because they keep everyone safe. Then there's the scribes, the educated people. Then the merchants, who keep the economy going pretty well. Then there's the craftsmen, then the peasants, and then the enslaved people. All right. Hieroglyphics, we're going to take just another quick look at that. This is the writing of ancient Egypt once again, and they use symbols to depict meanings and letters. Now, for the longest time, for 1,000 years or more, people lost the ability to read hieroglyphics. It wasn't until the Rosetta Stone was discovered in the early 1800s by Napoleon Bonaparte that we were able to rediscover the way to read Egyptian hieroglyphics. That is, and it is because of this. So we have the hieroglyphics up top on the stone, and then there is a different Egyptian alphabet and Greek on the Rosetta Stone. And they are saying the same thing. So it gives us a way to translate the meanings of words and letters from hieroglyphics into Greek, and we can translate the Greek into any language you want after that, basically. So yeah, that is how that all works now. And our last one, talking about pyramids just a little bit more. This is the greatest architectural achievement of the Egyptian people of ancient times. And the reason why is we start out step pyramids, we move to this sloped one here, and then we get into what we think of more. And these are all like in the same area on the Giza Plateau. And we say they're the great architectural achievement because of how perfectly they were mathematically built. They're completely square, 100% square. Every corner is 90 degrees at the base. They are perfectly sloped to create a perfect triangle on each side. And mathematically, there's a lot of crazy stuff in there, like the engineering and planning that went into these was just as perfect, if not more perfect, than like our contractors and engineers do now for building buildings. So that's just a couple of things for some knowledge on ancient Egypt. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we will be back next time with yet another civilization.